Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you are doing well. And today we've got another amazing article from our buddy, Scott Mendelson over at Forbes. And he's talking about the story that I actually covered yesterday, but he gives some very specific and, as we of course will know, very deep and insightful thoughts as to why there should be two films to end this current Star Wars trilogy, quadrilogy, whatever it's going to end up being at the very end of the day. So let's see what Scott's 5 reasons have to be. I cannot wait. It's going to be nothing but gold. So the first thing he says is history shows that the whole split one movie into 2 movies works pretty well, says me. Well, already off to a very, very good start, Scotty. Already off to a very good start, saying I say it's true, so therefore it must be true, and that's why I am right. That seems to be kind of the go-ahead expression to a lot of things that we're seeing in the media these days. It's, well, we're saying that it's true, and so therefore it must be true, when you actually put most of these things to scrutiny, they end up not being correct. I cannot proclaim that Star Wars Episode 9 and Star Wars 10 would, as 2 movies, be better than merely one overlong Star Wars 9. As far as the whole split one movie into 2 thing goes, it actually is a pretty decent track record. I'm the idiot who thinks the Warner Brothers inclusion, or rather, Warner Brothers Matrix Reloaded is the best movie in the Matrix trilogy. It says a lot, man. And I'm even the moron who thinks Warner Brothers Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 1 is the best Harry Potter movie. That's not as bad. Wait, it gets worse. I like the last 2 Hunger Games movies, Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, more than the first 2. Okay, now you're just kind of going off the deep end. And bloat notwithstanding, I don't hate Gore Verbinski's Dead Man's Chest or At World's End. Oh, so basically what you're trying to say is that in your own mind, in your own thought process, you don't have a problem with these films, and it's totally fine, and therefore, that alone, because of your own subjective view of these films, it therefore shows that this would be a good idea because the system works well, but you can only really say the system works well because of what you say about it. When you actually look at the numbers itself, when you actually look at the box office numbers and how the movies, how the amount of money shifts between film to film does not really hold up nearly as well. And then, of course, you have to talk about the times when they tried the same thing, and guess what? The films weren't even ever made. Just look to Divergent, for example. They were going to split that into 2, and then, yeah, who knows when we're going to get that last Divergent film at this point, but that's besides the point, I guess. In those cases, the extra movie allowed the filmmakers to spend more time on pure character development and character work as opposed to trying to cover as much plot as possible in the allotted running time. Well, you see, maybe to a couple of those films you mentioned, you might be able to argue that point, but you cannot tell me that they split up Hunger Games or that they split up any of the other films that you mentioned, saying, oh, it was just about making expanding upon the plot, expanding upon the characters. Because most people who are very big fans of the source material, of the books that those movies that you were just talking about were based on, hated the movies in a lot of ways, and especially hated when they split certain films or certain books of a trilogy or a quadrilogy into multiple films. They said it didn't work. Instead, it just seemed to them, just like it is in most cases, a money grab. Unfortunately, when they split a movie, when they split the last film in a trilogy into 2 films and make it a quadrilogy instead, most likely, the most often and common scenario is that they just want to make as much money as possible, and so they're going to spend a half-hearted effort on part 1 and part 2 and give you 2 mediocre films instead of saying, let's put all of our resources onto this one film to try to make it as best as possible. That's why I've said before, when it comes to Star Wars making these 2 films, it could be one of 2 things. Either one, they realize, wait a minute, we need to fix the issues, the narrative, the objective narrative flaws of The Last Jedi, or they're saying, well, we just want to try and get as much money out of it as possible. And I've already said, if they try and go that second route, if they make that first film and they're promising certain things or they're implying that they're going to do certain things and then they don't deliver, there's no way that anyone's going to come back for part 2. Let alone, I don't even know at this point how many people are going to show up for part 9 of this trilogy in the first place. All right. If audiences like part 1 of 2, then they will absolutely show up for part 2 of 2. That's interesting. So what he's saying here is that if you liked part 1, if you enjoyed showing up for part 1, therefore you automatically then will show up for part 2. Now, I can understand why someone might say this. Well, if you really enjoy a movie and there's a sequel to it, you most likely are going to see it. But you're also hinging on the first part being very good. So to me, it's just, again, you trying to say this is a reason why Star Wars will work or why I think it's a good idea, but it's hinging on that first film being good, of which at this point we don't have a guarantee. again, there's two routes that Lucasfilm can take. They can either start to listen to the fans. They can either start to think back and say, how can we make this better? How can we make the overall broad fan base happy? And can we do enough to bring the people who have left back in? Or, well, no, we're fine with what Rian Johnson did. We support with what Rian Johnson did, and so we're going to continue to go in that direction and try to subvert everyone's expectations, not caring how many people go to see our movies. Obviously, you can see that there's two different routes there, and both lead to very different financial situations. Even that first one, though, even if they do decide to start giving fan service, even if they do decide to listen to fans, that's not a guarantee that they're going to make a huge box office break, or rather a huge they're not going to have a huge box office success. Because when you look down, for example, the numbers of The Last Jedi, you look at the numbers of Solo, you see that there's a downward trend. And just looked at my comments section, there are so many people who are just saying, I'm done. I don't care. It could be the greatest film ever, and I just don't care. I'm not going to go see it. And it's really sad to see those people say those things, because it is the reality that we live in today's world, where Star Wars, the universe, the fandom has just become so broken that so many people are just giving up on it altogether. So you can say that yeah, if part 1 retcons 8, and then goes in a really cool direction, yeah, you're damn right people are going to show up for part 2, but it all hinges on part 1 being a part of it. So let's see, they mentioned Twilight, which I'm sorry, like, the only reason why Twilight even worked was because they did what? Oh wait, they did fan service, because no one in their right mind would have gone to support those films unless they were giving the fans what they wanted to see. No one would have seen the last movie, or rather the last book split into 2, unless they were giving the fans what they wanted in both films. Like, that's just looking at things pretty logically at that point. Same thing with Harry Potter. Though with Harry Potter, I would say that most people would probably argue saying you could have made that into 1, and it probably would have been a pretty badass, kick-ass film. Though, of course, there are some people that defend that as well. Again, it really just depends. And I love how every single one of these books, isn't it interesting that they're mentioning all films that are based on YA material? Like, every single movie they're referencing, every single movie that Scott Mendelson's referencing is about a young adult novel, which already has a guaranteed audience in that teen demographic who are most likely to go see it, and also that we can look to those box office numbers, and we can go look to other franchises like Divergent and see, yeah, that doesn't always work. Because even if you do give the fans all they want, if at the same time you make a terrible film, people will still not go out to see it. They mentioned, or rather, Scott Mendelson at the very beginning saying, oh, well, Avengers Infinity War is being split up into 2. But when you actually look at what they're doing, you see, no, Avengers Infinity War is its own film. The story is contained within that film. They're going to continue and move forward with that story in what's called part 2, though I think it's a little bit different, because you can see that at the end of the day, it'll be 2 distinct Avengers movies instead of just being a part 1 and a part 2, which is why the names themselves are going to be very distinct. Avengers Infinity War versus Avengers Endgame, or whatever the title ends up being at that point. So, a little bit different. All the other ones, though, you can obviously see that there was just them trying to say part 1, part 2, etc., etc., but it's young adults, so I don't really see if that's a really good way to make a point here. Let's see what else he says. Turning a trilogy into a quadrilogy will bring balance to the timeline. Oh boy. All right, let's dive into this one a little bit further. So he says, artistically speaking, there is a value in turning this specific 3-part saga into a 4-part saga. Force Awakens and The Last Jedi all take place within about a week. But by all accounts, Episode 9 will be getting a time jump of sorts. That's fine, especially if you think, as I do, that The Last Jedi is essentially a series finale for the Star Wars saga. That's interesting. The Last Jedi is the climax of the whole 9-film Skywalker Solo saga, while Episode 9 is the epilogue. But cutting Episode 9 into 2 movies allows you to essentially have a 4-part saga where the first takes place in one specific moment in time, while the second half, not just the last third, takes place in another moment in time. Well, you already have some problems with your logic here, because you're trying to say, in your mind, Episode 8 was the closing part, was the closing moments to that saga, was closing off that moment, and that Episode 9 would just be the epilogue. So what's the point of them making an epilogue into 2 films? See, that already doesn't work by itself, because if that was your argument, then you could have said Episode 8 was going to be part 1 of the end, and then Episode 9 was going to be part 2 of the end, and then the second part of 9, or Episode 10, would be the epilogue. That is how you would break that down from a logical standpoint. But the way that you've done it just doesn't make any damn sense, because who in their right mind would make a 2-movie epilogue of a story? No one, because the epilogue is supposed to be that short little ending to the entire universe, to that entire story. Doesn't work for you, man. So going back to that for a second, if we were to look at episode 8 in the way that he does, it makes things even worse, because if that is the ending to the Skywalker saga, even though we know Leia's being back, even though we know that Luke Skywalker's coming back in some capacity, it also just doesn't match up to what we know this next film is going to be. So again, you might try and justify this. To me, as someone who's trying to justify in his mind that episode 8 wasn't that bad if you look at it as an end point and not as a middle film. But here's the problem. It doesn't work that way. When you actually break down the storycraft, going back to my terms from Matthew Kadish, if you break down the storycraft and understand that there are severe narrative flaws, it doesn't matter whether this is a middle film, a first film, or a last film. It doesn't matter, because it is still inherently flawed. And to try and say this is the end point, that episode 8 rather was the end point, and episode 9 is instead going to be the epilogue, just creates so much more chaos in general and just ignores a lot of the objective reality when it comes down to it. Another point, he says, it would buy Lucasfilm time to map out the post-Skywalker solo Star Wars saga while offering a Star Wars or an Avatar every Christmas. This, to me, is the one point that kind of makes the most sense. It would make a lot of sense for them to split up into the two films. Again, only if it means episode 9 retcons a lot of 8, episode 10 finishes the damn story, because then it does give them that time that they need to say, okay, well, where do we go from here? What is the next trilogy? What is the next story that we're going to say? Episode 10 can then be that end point, and guess what? You can put the damn epilogue into just that film. You don't have to dedicate an entire... Who dedicates an entire epilogue to a film, or rather to a story within an entire 2-hour film, 2.5-hour film? Scott Mendelson. I don't know anyone in the right mind who would do that. But when it comes down to it, if it does give them that time to develop, to listen to the fans, to understand what stories do they want to see, what characters will they actually go out to see in theaters, that could be a really cool thing that they could end up doing. Are they going to do it? It's still up in the air, because we don't even know if they're going to try and retcon 8. There's still a lot of mixed sources coming out saying, oh, they're about to address the fact, they're starting to address certain things about Rey's character, basically saying that there's rumors now saying that Rey was being lied to when she was told her parents were nobodies, and that there are going to be somebody, and that's going to be able to fix at least that bit of discontinuity between the first film and the second film. There are other people who are pointing out other things too, and when you just look down to it, this would give them, these two films together would give them another 2-3 years, depending on how much they want to stretch it, to be able to figure out, okay, what characters do we focus on? Do we try and bring back a character like Obi-Wan Kenobi to put it in a solo film? Do we let that be the first film? Because that's also another thing. If you want to space things out, if you want to make... Here's the game plan, Disney. This is the perfect way to not only make great Star Wars films, but also to bring people back. Episode 9 is a retcon of 8. The most of the film is talking about all the issues with 8, talking about maybe even making a reference to hyperspace ramming, or just in some way retconning it. And of course, there's many ways you could do that. You could do that as a Force stream, that maybe Luke was being interrogated and was captured by Kylo Ren and Supreme Leader Snoke, and it was all this dream that he was thinking these things were going on, when in reality they were not. That could be really cool. I also made the argument saying that you could at least justify Luke's character by turning him into a clone, and you could obviously have some more things that you could obviously play with that a little bit more. Another way, and I'm sure there's countless other methods or countless other theories out there, is you could deal with time travel. You can go between the world between worlds that's introduced in the I believe it's in Rebels that it's introduced to. Then you can actually have a capacity to essentially do away with, if not everything, almost everything of episode 8. You do that, and then episode 10, J.J. Abrams, whatever you had planned from the beginning, whatever big ideas you had, just put them out there. Because even if they're not the best thing, even not the thing that everyone can get behind, as long as most people can get behind it, that's how you make money, and that's how you make people come back for more. The problem, again, with Rian Johnson is that he made a film that he wanted only half of the audience to like, while the other half he just didn't give a damn about. And that's just not how you make a good movie as far from a financial standpoint. It just does not make sense. So that's why if you do this, then at that point, you could easily, during that time period of the 2 years, you could say, all right, here's the first thing we're going to do. We're not going to make another solo project film between that time. The first film that's going to debut in 2020 is going to be a Ben Kenobi origin story. That is a movie then, at that point, if you do those other things, if you, again, retcon 8 and then end in a very awesome way, the Skywalker saga in episode 10, you could then say, well, now we're going to start going after these legacy characters. Now we're going to try to develop them, and those are going to be the stories that we're going to tell. We're going to tell either those stories, or you could lay out a plan saying every other year we're going to introduce another EU character, another EU origin story, and then from there, of course, you can just build the gigantic universe. And then, once again, you have another year or 2 years to develop an actual trilogy of the actual episodic episodes, because then you could at that point say, okay, we're gonna make episodes 11, 12, 13, or however it is that you want to start this new trilogy. If you want to just say that, no, the Skywalkers are done, it's going to be a 10 episode series and that's how it's going to be, we're going to start with something else, that's great. But again, this all relies on them actually going out and doing these things, as I've said them before. So again, this is like the only point where I'm totally on board with you, man, because I agree. This does and would buy them a lot of time to actually get their crap together, get somebody, if they haven't done so at this point, because again, if these things are going to happen, Kathleen Kennedy cannot be in charge because she has already shown herself incapable of being able to make those kinds of decisions. Rian Johnson's trilogy has to be gone. And at that point, we need to know who is the next person that's going to lead Disney further, who's going to lead the Star Wars division of Disney further. And those are all things that are very contingent of everything. And then this last point, he says, Disney has nothing to lose. This is totally wrong. They have everything to lose. They've already pissed off at least half the fan base because of The Last Jedi. They continue to piss off those same people because they continue to have people like Rian Johnson, etc., go out and try and call them out. Now, of course, there's some people who say, oh, they're just being bullies, etc. I'm sorry, but you don't really have a whole lot of there for that, because someone who just goes out and says, hey, this is a problem with your movie, how do you address it? And then they come back and say, oh, you're just a man baby. That's not really what you're talking about there, man. But no, Disney has a lot to lose. Disney has essentially everything to lose, because if you've already pissed off about half your fan base, and I know some people say, oh, it's not half, you can't say half. Okay, a significant portion of your fan base. Does that make you feel better? If you piss off a significant portion of your fan base, what do you end up doing? You end up putting everything on the line for this last thing, because if this last film, if this last two films, as it might be, does not deliver, does not bring people back, does not fix the glaring narrative issues in previous films, specifically The Last Jedi, you're not going to have anyone to sell this product to in the future. Star Wars is fine as an IP. Star Wars as a concept, as an idea. We see fan films. We see some of the things in the comics, in the books, for example. It's fine. But the movies, one cannot argue, are doing just fine. Some people can say, oh, well, in total, they've made, multi-billion dollars. But the trend is going down. Merchandise is plummeting. Blu-ray sales is plummeting. And as my boy Darth Nemesis over on Twitter just told me about, it's not even The Last Jedi was one of the lowest pirated films in 2017, 2018. So that already tells you, if that movie isn't even good enough, or it doesn't even interest someone to pirate it and to steal it for free, that tells you what the state of Star Wars is right now, because normally Star Wars is not just the highest grossing film, it's usually also at least in the top 10 films of films that want to get pirated. And some people might say, oh, it's not a very good metric. I'm sorry, but as someone who is able to see these things just from a very just common sense standpoint, I can tell you, I'm sorry, but if my film that was supposed to be amazing and was supposed to make multi-billion dollars at the box office and was also to sell merchandise and Blu-rays and everything like that and have people psyched up for another film, and I was told that film did not even get pirated a whole lot, that would have me concerned. But anyway, guys, what are y'all's thoughts on this? What do you think about Scott Mendelson? Do you think any of his points are valid, or do you think that there's just not quite enough evidence there for him to try and explain it in these ways? Obviously, would it be a good idea for them to have the films split up into two? They'll have the last story split up into two? Yes. But again, only if it means that part one of that story goes on to help to explain a retcon 8 so that episode 10 can be its own film. If they just try and throw a bunch of things together and throw a bunch of fan service and say, oh, look, we have Force Ghost Anakin, or look, we have Force Ghost Ben Kenobi, or look, we have Force Ghost Yoda back once again, and look at all, they're doing all these cool things, that in and of itself will not be enough for hardcore fans to come back, because until you address the huge elephant in the room, which is the narrative inconsistencies and flaws and plot holes of episode 8, anything else going forward is just going to immediately fall into those holes. Even if it's cool, Even if people come out saying, I like the film, at the end of the day, deep down inside, they'll know, yeah, but when you watch the films together, it's not going to make any sense. They need to address that. That's a big thing that they need to do. So anyway, guys, what are y'all's thoughts about this? Please let me know in the comments below. I greatly appreciate that. Also, hit that like button. Hit that and smash that like button. It just helps me out so much. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do that. And also, share the video. If you like this content, please let me know. Please let me know your own ideas for things that you might want to see me do in the future. And I'd appreciate that, guys. So have a great day. And as always, God bless.